Welcome to Shares from the American College of Financial Services, where we're invested in expanding your opportunities. Here's a look at what we'll be sharing with you today.
Some markets recover quickly, 9/11 and COVID. Some linger like the dot-com. I just think that going to cash or shorting stock or day trading or concentrating on commodities, those don't seem to pay off.
Hi, I'm Eric Ludwig. Welcome to Shares. Very fortunate to have Professor of Practice Steve Parrish at the American College. Steve, I think this is a great time to have you on. We have unprecedented market volatility going on spring of 2025. And there's some historical perspective I think that you'll be able to provide that will be really helpful. Something that we were chatting about, and then we'll get into this, is that we saw an article from the New York Times that was sort of, what should people do now? And the reason that article got some heat was all of the things that we should sort of in air quotes do now were really things that you should have done before, so maybe fall of 2024, if you had the crystal ball. And so I think one of the things, at least, that we want to do today is to really talk about what could you actually do today, now that we're in market volatility, not just if you had the crystal ball. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, that sounds good. And I'm kind of curious what you can give us for advice. So I'll be throwing some at your way too.
Well, this would be great. To some extent, people have said we've never seen anything like this before. And I was hoping maybe you could just kick us off and start with talk about some past experience that you've seen from your point of view. You've been around in the markets for a while, and I'll just leave it at that.
Well, I appreciate the euphemism, been around the market for a while. In other words, you're old. What have you seen? So I started as a financial advisor in the early 80s. So let me just put a couple perspectives of things that have happened. Give me a minute to kind of go through it. So August 31st, 1998, that's not a familiar date to most people, but there was a 6.4% drop in the market. What happened, and not everybody remembers this, is long-term capital management bet wrong on the Russian ruble. These were two PhDs who had gotten Nobel Prizes in economics. They were wrong. I was in Ohio presenting to a group of financial advisors. Markets were so chaotic that we almost canceled the meeting. So people forget that. How about this one? The dot-com bubble that burst in March of 2000. So what we had was a 2-year sell-off coming off of that. I had an employee who lost over 70% on his 401k and really didn't recover it because it was all in tech like pets.com and things like that. So, it was a very real pain. Let's go forward a year to 9/11. That was a year later. We know what happened, but let's remind ourselves. New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ closed for 4 days. And the first week of trading, the S&P 500 fell more than 14%. But 1 month later, the S&P had recouped those losses. Just a few more. The Great Recession, we all know about that, 2007 to 2009. GDP, went down 3%. Unemployment went up to 10%. But you know what? The Dow, which had lost over half of its value in August of 2007 peak, basically recovered by March of 2013 and broke its 2007 high. And as a personal note, just what I did, I decided I'm just going to keep everything where it is when this all kicked in December of 2007. 35% loss, all came back by 2010. We had the recent COVID scare. We know that sent markets reeling. My point, I got a question for you. It's too early to tell, I think. In some cases, it might be that we've seen a dam building and bursting like the dot-com bubble. But in others, it's just a black swan event. You've heard that term, where the Great Recession or COVID, we didn't know that was going to happen. It just happened. And you can decide where you think this one is. But some markets recover quickly, 9/11 and COVID. Some linger like the dot-com. I just think that going to cash or shorting stock or day trading or concentrating on commodities, those don't seem to pay off. So I think it's patience. But Eric, let me ask you, how have you talked with clients about the challenge of staying in markets and why they want to stay involved and not panic?
Well, I'll try to give a couple bullet points of things that have helped. Let me start by just saying to your point, when you were talking about the financial crisis of 08, 09, it is kind of funny because in my mind, I'm not that old, I'm 45. But that's when I started my career as a financial planner. I got hired as an advisor from being a pilot in September of 2007. So my first 18 months, I always tell people this, my first 18 months on the job were during the 18 months of the financial crisis, right? So September to March of '09 when the market bottomed out. And for me, my thought of going into working as a financial planner, I really thought it was about building optimal portfolios. I really thought that was my job. And then it wasn't until you started, the phone was ringing nonstop during that time. What should I do? What should I do? It had nothing to do with building optimal portfolios, right? We weren't talking about, oh, well, Europe's down more than this, we should rebalance. That is not what we were doing. A lot of what we were doing was trying to, for one, understand what people's concerns were, address them in various ways. And one of the number one things that I've found that's been helpful is asking people a simple question, which is, when do you need the money? When do you need the money? And we know that we build up these portfolios over 40 years, right? And then we're trying to then take an unknown length of time in retirement to then spend it back down. And the point is, it's over time. So yes, there are some current needs that individuals are certainly going to have. Some of those are going to be this year, right? But when you get people thinking about, well, yeah, I need to fund this over the next, who knows how many years, but at least let's say 20, 30, whatever that number is, that's the start, I think, of reframing that conversation. And to realize the next kind of the follow-up question is to then look at the individual holdings in a portfolio and start punching through, hey, why do we own this? Why do we own this? Right? So like, let's say, hey, we have some money in cash. Why did we do that? Well, one of the purposes was that in a volatile time, we want to take distributions. We have a place to do that from. Okay, great. That makes sense. What about bonds? Actually, this year bonds have done really well. They've actually done their part, not to completely offset the volatility of stocks, but they're there to create a buffer. So again, if we're trying to fund retirement, it's just providing another source. Great. What about stocks? Why do we own those? Right? So you can kind of keep punching through. I'll stop there to get some reaction, but those were a couple things that I've used to kind of help people get through this.
Yeah, and I think the framework you're giving it is you first got to figure out what your goal is before you figure out what you're going to do. So in other words, aren't we really talking about helping our clients with a successful retirement? I mean, this isn't how do I make more money this year? If you know an answer to that, let me know. I don't know what I have to short right now. But if it's really more for retirement, then I think we have to figure out which products fit for what. And in fact, what I'd like to bring up, Eric, is a point, just knowing the audience that's probably listening to this, is some of this audience probably uses some of these index products. So you've got like fixed index annuities and index universal life versus variable products like that. And I just want to make a point, because this is an observation I have, is it'll be interesting to see down the road how these did, because if you get a fixed index annuity or an IUL, you have a 0% return, which is a good thing right now. Maybe, if the markets go down and at least you didn't lose any money. RILAs, those have only been around a few years, and those let you tell how much risk you want to take. You can actually dial in a 10% loss floor, and some people may say, 10% loss right now, I'll take it versus what the markets may do. But the challenges I just want to point out is, where does this go? What if we have a quick recovery? I mean, at the time we're recording this, we suddenly had this record increase in the market yesterday. You don't get to ride that up if you've got a cap on your product. So it might be a 20% return, but you might have an 8% cap in your product. And so you're only going to ride that up 8%. The other one I want to bring up, Eric, is, and I just mean this is why we as advisors have to be careful we know what on earth we're presenting, is these are measured, a lot of them are measured point to point. Well, I'll tell you what, early April, that point was a lot lower than at least the time we're recording this, when there was a market recovery. And so how you measure the gain you actually had is extremely dependent on the date. So all I want to point out is, in these turbulent markets, variable and index products aren't the same. So this is where we really need to put on our technician hats and make sure our clients understand what they're getting into and what's happening, if that makes sense. Let me ask you, in fact, the big issue for potential retirees is sequence of return. Where are we with that right now in these turbulent markets, from your perspective?
Yeah, and it's one of those terms that I feel like we say it enough times that it starts just to be its own term. And you're like, yeah, sequence of return risk. Yeah, well, it's a risk early in retirement. What does that mean? Right? And then what to do about it. Just as a quick aside, I mean, what we're talking about is you could have, say, two investors. Let's say it's me and you, Steve. And let's say I'm going to have a 30-year retirement, you're going to have a 30-year retirement. And let's say we each have the same average return. Let's say we both average, I don't know, 8% in both of our 30-year retirements. But what really matters is not so much the average over the 30 years, it's the sequence that we earned each return each year, right? So, and if you think about it, let's say going into my retirement, let's say I earn negative for my first 4 years, and then I do really well and average higher going past that. That's where the issue is, right? Because all of a sudden we have these down years early in retirement, like in this example, and we're taking money out. That's where problems can happen, right? Because now we're taking distributions out, assuming that we're selling shares to fund it. Now, whenever the market does return, whether it's 6 months or 6 years, now we have fewer shares that are now growing back whenever that recovery happens, right? So that's the problem. That's the problem. That's why there's in the RICP and the Retirement Income Certified Professional designation, we talk so much about all of these different methods to help mitigate that. The one that sticks out to me is for how to manage that is actually having a plan, and maybe this is because of my pilot days, it's having a plan before you go into retirement as to how, like what you're going to do and when, right? Like when I was a pilot, if we had an engine fire or a failure at different parts of the takeoff, we knew exactly what we were going to do before we ever got into the airplane, right? And it's the same type of approach. I feel like if you have that from a withdrawal plan perspective, you've already done the thinking before you have the feeling. That's what's key, right? So like a specific example could be that when the portfolio is down, say 30%, we're going to reduce our withdrawal rate until it then improves. So I think that's one that really sticks out to me.
The most valuable tool for your clients approaching retirement is financial literacy. Introducing the Retirement Course from the American College of Financial Services. The Retirement Course is a free, comprehensive program focused on retirement preparation and readiness solutions your clients need right now. 4 badges to earn make progressing through the online lessons engaging, interactive, and deeply informative. From generating retirement income to legacy planning, retirement psychology, long-term care considerations, health insurance, Medicare, housing, Social Security, and more, the Retirement Course is a holistic learning experience through retirement planning and a powerful tool to strengthen your relationship with clients approaching or at retirement. Help secure your clients' wellness, confidence, certainty, and legacy in retirement by sharing the Retirement Course with them now. Visit trc.theamericancollege.edu to learn more.
The challenge, I'm kind of curious, is to do a lot of that kind of planning and figure out where you're going to go. We so often use Monte Carlo, but right now, Monte Carlo is extremely scary because we could go from a few months ago to saying you remember the traditional term, 8% risk of failure to suddenly a 20% risk of failure. How do you deal with that when clients are already nervous?
Right. And then even what does that mean, right? What does that number mean?
Yeah.
I'll walk through just something real quick that we've talked about recently, which is, if you do kind of the standard, I'm going to call it the standard Monte Carlo, right? So you have essentially a balanced portfolio, 30 years, 4% withdrawal rate. You're going to increase that with inflation each year. Again, when we do these types of things, we know that's going to have about a 90% probability of success. Again, like whatever that means. If all of a sudden if we cut that down to say starting that same portfolio with 20% less, and you run that everything forward, everything else stays the same, that probability of success now lowers to about 80%. So it can be shocking. I think that's what you're kind of getting at, right, Steve? It's like, well, wait a minute, we just ran this say 4 months ago, and I had this probability of success versus this one.
Yeah, yeah. I used to be an A student. Now I'm a C student. I'm only going to get a 50%. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you get beyond that? I think, so there's two things I'll say. One is this first one, which is if at the same time you then change your allocation to lower the risk and then run that same Monte Carlo out the remaining, say it's 29 years instead of 30, that's where you'll actually see the biggest drop. So sure, like you said, I go from an A to a B student. But what if now I'm a B student and I take chips off the table, I reduce the risk in my portfolio and then run this simulation? You might show that it has a 10% probability of success. So now you went from being a B student to like, you're going to fail for sure, right? So that I think has been helpful to show like and we were talking about this earlier, you could be short-term right, meaning the portfolio is like you could go to cash or bonds or whatever, and you're going to escape this volatility, but then you run these simulations out and you could be long-term broke. And I feel like those are the types of points that if you can talk through, that actually changes behavior.
And part of it is how you say it. You and I were both at the Horizons conference for the American College, and Michael Kitces got up and said something that at least to me was an aha. I hadn't thought of it this way, as he said, forget this whole probability of failure or even probability of success. It's a probability of adjustment. In other words, when the markets were stable, we had an 8% probability that we may have to adjust that withdrawal. But now things are not going so well, and so maybe that's a 20%. It doesn't mean you're going to fail. It just means there's a higher percentage now that we may have to do some adjusting. Or another one, I don't know if you've seen this, Eric, but we always like to be cutting edge here. Derek Tharp, who you and I both have interviewed, does work for Kitces, came up with this, he calls it high MAV concept, which sounds like something from a Top Gun movie. But what it's getting at is you use historical market visualization. So what you do instead of just a straightforward Monte Carlo is you actually show how whatever strategy you've come up with would have performed during the Great Recession. And so you can actually show it. And that way they go, well, I don't remember that, or my parents remember that. So this is how it would have done. So if I had that policy statement that said I'm not going to take more than 20% or whatever, I would have gotten through it. I think that's very comforting to know that.
I agree. Because I think when you do Monte Carlo and you're running, say, 5,000 simulations or whatever, 10,000 simulations, it's like, what does that really mean? Like, but if to your point, there is a value of showing historical returns in the sequence that they actually played out, and then sort of back testing us whatever that withdrawal strategy is, right? I agree, because it's the same thing you could do with the high inflation periods, the stagflation, right? So we had a stagnant economy in the 60s, and inflation, which is some people are saying could be sort of today's environment. Same deal. That's actually where the 4% rule has its roots, right? Is that, and I forget the exact year, but a 30-year retirement starting in, it's like 62, 64, something like that, right? And that 4% withdrawal kind of came from that in that time frame. It's the same idea, right? You could back test these withdrawal strategies and show that historical perspective.
Let me ask you a question. So in these volatile times, and obviously we have a polarized society too, how do you deal with these kind of things? And we haven't even talked about taxes too. That's volatile right now. How do you talk to a client about this and avoid turning it into a political thing? Either tariffs are good, tariffs are bad, tax reductions are good, they're bad. How do you do that in a way that you can get the client to calm down and do the right thing rather than win a political battle?
I think for me, what we've been trying to do anyways is like the way that you started this episode even is to talk about, man, I can remember in this time frame this happened. You know, we had the tech bubble burst. That was a weird thing. We had the financial crisis. That was its own separate thing. We had COVID. That was a health thing, right? Every time is different. Every time is different. But the way people respond is the same. Like, we didn't stop being humans. We didn't stop having emotions. We didn't stop having the same desires and goals through any one of these time frames, right? So that part is the same. And to a large extent, what people then do with their portfolios is the same. So if we can agree on that, then you can start to see, okay, well, now let's look at this historically and see when these types of things happen, how do these play out? Like, what does an average drawdown look like? What does an average recovery look like? What happens if I miss? What if I sit in cash for a week, a month, a quarter? What does that look like? And then I feel like, again, you're starting to kind of retool the conversation of like, okay, and those have been the things that have actually been most helpful.
In fact, let me add something. I mean, if we're talking about helping people with retirement planning, it's not just the market. Two things I think right now they want to keep track of. Taxes. Congress will do something with taxes because the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act goes away, large parts of it, at the end of this year. So we can't say, well, we'll just wait. I mean, we have to watch this. So Roth conversions would be an excellent example right now because when the market's down, maybe that's the time to do it. Taxes are likely not to go even further down. So, I mean, thinking through things like that. And Eric, the other one I want to bring up that is new to me is the service issue. So we have a lot of people that are getting to approaching retirement, Social Security, Medicare. I've not seen this happen with Social Security. I'm not so worried that they won't fund Social Security and Medicare. I think that politically will have to, eventually get resolved. But right now, legitimately, there is an issue. So if you're working with clients and they're ready to retire, you have to get online now to take care of some of these Social Security issues because some of the offices are having blackouts and all those kind of things. And Medicare won't wait. When you turn 65, you got to do something. The other thing I would add is maybe this is a time, if the client's willing and can handle it, maybe you hold off on retirement. In other words, you come up with a plan, but we got to flex with it. So I just bring that up. We have taxes that may affect some of this, and there's some things we can do now. And we really have to start thinking through how do we help them in the actual process, because this is something we haven't really seen before, and it's time to deal with that.
So let me ask you this, because we talk about this in RICP. You brought up something that I feel like from an academic perspective, we say these things when you're like, cool, how do we apply it? Well, this is a great example. So let's say you are meeting with someone and you're going through this sort of checklist of things we can control, things we can't control, right? Something we can control, allocation. We've been talking about that. And then you kind of just brought up this other idea of expenses, right? Can you talk through, like, we talk about this in RICP. What is the purpose of talking about like discretionary versus essential, and how does that show up like in today's world?
Right. That's good because there are things we can do. I mean, most of our clients, at least if they have some assets. So maybe right now they're going to need some income. Maybe they can reduce. We're seeing that happen already. There's people cutting back and things, but they still need cash. If they have cash value in life insurance, why not tap that? Because it's not correlated to the market, and they can always replenish it. What about a home equity loan? And I know that sounds anathema to say that right now, but rates aren't that bad. And if you've already set up a reverse mortgage and have a line of credit, well, clearly this would be a time to tap that. And I'm not saying go to cash, but I'm saying maybe if someone's retiring, does need some income, maybe they tap, they don't want to overdo it, but maybe they tap some of their liquidity sources like cash and wait out the market a little bit. I made that reference to waiting out the market during the Great Recession, and it all worked out in the end. So those kind of practical things are things they should be thinking about, not just saying, I don't get it, so I'm not going to do anything. I'm not proposing that at all, but do the common sense things that you can do while you're waiting this out.
Yep, I agree. I mean, even just, I'm, not retired, obviously, and I'm, probably say 20 years away from doing so. But even along those lines, even with a steady income or, different sources of income, my wife and I talked about the same thing. We had a trip coming up planned, just like a weekend thing. And we're like, you know what? There's enough uncertainty where, I don't know, why don't we just skip it? Yeah, okay, fine. And to your point, I think it is a matter of identifying some of those things. One thing that's come up too, I was talking to somebody about this, like kind of categorizing expenses into these different buckets, if you will. And she asked me, she said, what about my gym membership? I said, well, you tell me, what about your gym membership? She's like, should I cut them? Like, how important is it to you? She's like, it's very, it's like, for one, there's the health aspect, but she does Pilates, and there's like there's a social part of it too. Like she goes there, they get coffee afterwards. It's like, yeah, then absolutely no, don't cut that. Right. So like to your point, there's retirement. We're talking about markets. Sure. That's a thing. There's all these other stuff, right? Social, health, all these other things that need to be weaved into that decision.
Breathe, chill.
Yeah, download a meditation app.
Okay, Eric, it's my turn to ask you a tough one. So we have an audience of advisors. So their clients look at their quarterly statements and suddenly said, "Wow, my value, my market value went down, and yet your fee is there." And how'd you earn it? Or maybe you're commission based. Maybe you're hybrid and do both, but you're commission based. And right now, everybody's too nervous to write a check for anything until they know what's going on. And yet, you have to ask value. I guess where I'm going with that is there a value you can show to them? Maybe it's your educational knowledge, what you know. How do you get in front of the client and earn the right to give them the advice right now?
There's a couple interesting things going on. One is if you're an AUM-based advisor, oftentimes you're charging, say, quarterly, maybe monthly, right? And the fee is consistent. The fee in terms of the timing is consistent, but the advice can be lumpy. Right. So sometimes you're paying, like if you're a client, if you're looking at it from their perspective, they're paying for this quarterly or monthly, whatever it is. But the type of advice they get could all be like right now. Right. And like if you think about it, it's kind of interesting because in an up market, you might be like, I don't care. I've had several clients where I try to reach them, like say in the summer, during a good year, and they're like, I don't care. I'm good. Right. Whereas right now, it's down market. Right. People are freaked out and this is like, I feel like if you think about what a financial planner is at its core, this is another helping profession, right? And if you were looking to get into this business to help people, this is when they want help. So to the extent that you can help people through this by doing a lot of the things we've been talking about, can you walk them through some of the budget things? Can you walk them through the history of markets? If you have that expertise and that knowledge, you can walk through them planning opportunities, right? Instead of shifting gears like you were talking about, hey, is this the time to do a Roth conversion? Is this the time to tap these different income sources? If you have the knowledge, not only are you helping them, they're going to probably be talking to a friend at the Friday night fish fry or whatever. In Wisconsin, we have them anyways. And then the question comes up is like, oh man, can you believe these markets? Yeah, actually, I talked to my guy and he said, for one, I'm going to okay. And then he talked about doing something with my Roth. I don't know what it is, right? But it's a way you could actually attract clients, I think. I would say never give up a good market downturn. It's a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity.
That's excellent input, really is. Thanks.
I want to just kind of bring this up again because some people are saying, hey, I just want to stop the bleeding, right? That's one of these things. And should I sit in cash? How would you respond to that? You kind of just started to get to it with different income sources. Are there other thoughts that pop into your mind about how do you respond when somebody says that?
Well, I think we just would summarize and every advisor is in a different position with their client, but I think we definitely have to remind them of history. That's what we started with. Because a lot of these people, this is the first time, and even if they were around when some of this happened, this is the first time they're really approaching retirement. So if we go through some of these historical things, and just remind them that, I hate to say it this way, this too shall pass. I don't know. This is new to us. But if we were reminded there are elements of what's going on now that have happened in the past, that may get them to not overreact. And second, maybe you work more on tactics and less on strategy. In other words, we don't know what's going on, so let's not completely change our retirement plan, but let's look at tactics like maybe you get your subscriptions, maybe you have some that you really don't need to get rid of those. Maybe you go to cash and not go to cash, I'm sorry, you take from cash to take some of your retirement income. Maybe you make sure that you don't go to Social Security right now and defer it till later. All these kind of tactical things will help you get by, will give you the Band-Aid you need until at some point we'll have a clearer idea of what's going on.
Yep, absolutely. I love that. Yeah, it's put some pencil to the paper. What can we actually do? Start identifying those. That really changes the shift in mindset, right? As to like, I can't do anything, because I think that is a concern, is I can't do anything about this. You can't do anything about what the president does or what the Fed does or what the economy does, but there are all these other things. I feel like once you start penciling in, oh yeah, I can actually do this and that, that's very helpful. If you had a major takeaway today, is there one thing that you would recommend? Was there one, or maybe, I don't know if you want to keep it personal and be like, is there something that you've done? I know we were talking about this recently.
I know one thing is that you look at the ones that you can control. So I'll just say it. During COVID, the market went crazy. What did I do? I did a Roth conversion. And I look back and go, that was good. I just thought I'd take my little victories. And you just don't change the rules of the game when you don't know what the game is. So I guess we have to calm down our clients, get them thinking about what they can do. And the rest of it, they can go to the gym club and complain about politics, but don't make short-term mistakes just to win the argument.
I love that. Yep. I think that's probably a great place to wrap up for today. Thank you so much, Steve. This has been so much fun. I hope that your wisdom and your calmness kind of reverberates through the microphone, the speaker, and helps other people get through this. And maybe we'll do another follow-up to see how things have gone since then.
Good discussion. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
That's all for now, but you can find all our episodes on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and most other streaming services. Be sure to like us, follow us, and leave us a rating and review. Shares is a production of the American College of Financial Services, and we hope you join us next time as we share ideas that expand your opportunities.